our most important allies, our biggest neighbours, our biggest commercial partners in the European Union. That's the most important relationship. The Conservatives have blown it to smithereens, and it's going to have to be Labour's job to rebuild those vital relationships.
The front of the Observer, I'm sure, is going to ruffle a few feathers because the headline reads, Labour wants new EU links in a reset of foreign policy. Let me just read you a quote of what Sir Kier Starmer has been saying. There have always been two versions of Britain. Great Britain, outward-looking, internationalist and connected, and Little England, which is unfortunately what is being pursued by Rishi Sunak.
Well, I don't think it would surprise you, Alexis, to learn that I agree with a lot of what the Labour Party is saying on this particular issue. And contrary to what some of the Brexiters are saying, that any kind of, you could meet an EU official and apparently means we're going back into the European Union. They have no faith in their project. That's what's really underlying this. And they know that the British people are seeing through it. That's the bottom line of all these stories. But really, Labour is being pragmatic. And actually, they've been making these noises for a long time. I interviewed David Lammy for Perspective magazine last year, and he said exactly the kind of thing that he's quoted as saying here, and that Starmer is quoted as saying here, is that our most important allies, our biggest neighbours, our biggest commercial partners in the European Union, that's the most important relationship. The Conservatives have blown it to smithereens, and it's going to have to be Labour's job to rebuild those vital relationships. That is just pragmatism. I don't see how you could possibly disagree with that. If you do, it demonstrates to me that you are more interested in ideology, and more specifically, an ideology of separating and severing ourselves from the EU because you just don't like Europe. But Europe is a fact of life, whether you like it or not.
Well, as it happens, we have a prominent member of the team of Brexiters. Nick used to be Chief of Staff to Dominic Raab, at Department for Exiting the EU. What do you make of Labour saying, look, we want to have regular discussions with the EU? This is something that the EU, by the way, do on a biannual basis, I think, with other countries such as the US, and actually not biannual, bilateral summits are conducted regularly with the US, China and Canada, Australia and Japan. Shouldn't the UK also do the same?
I don't think there'll be any problem with talking to the EU. Can I just drift back, if I may, for a moment, that the idea that all Conservative and Brexiteers are Little Englanders, because it's a lovely soundbite and Jonathan is very colourful in the way he presents it. But I don't think...
I never said that.
I don't think...
To be fair, Sir Keir Starmer said it, not Jonathan.
I didn't say that. Okay. No, it's the first time the two of us have been confused.
But the reality is, it is a government that has gone out and tried to forge new trade agreements. I think it's at CPAC, which is the one in Asia. They formed agreements with Australia. They are working damn hard to get an agreement with India, one of the largest economies. So look, even in America, they're now going state by state, where prizes like California are very... So they're not inwardly looking. And as a Brexiteer, I was always outwardly looking. I was arguing that we could get on a stage and play our own part and actually exceed some of the agreements the EU did. However, to your point, is it legitimate to say that it was very hard for the British government to even think of doing business with Europe? And that's absolutely right. And I think even up to Boris Johnson's time, there was this toxicity between the EU and Britain that both could blame each other for not talking. Rishi Sunak's actually moved the dial on this, and he's moved it very hard with his Windsor Agreement, and you look at Horizon. So I think Labour are fighting a bit of an old war there. And I would urge them, if I was advising them, but I'm not, that actually any sense that they are playing back to the EU, particularly in terms of immigration, is going to be electorally a difficult thing for them in the so-called red wall, because people do not believe that the numbers for immigration should be set by Europe. It was one of the reasons many people, I know you're going to challenge that, but it was one of the reasons many people did vote. I didn't, but it's one of the many reasons people did vote for Brexit, that the numbers and the control should be set here.
But there's a world of difference between free movement of people and on irregular migration. And, Starmer, and I disagree with a lot of what Starmer says. It won't surprise you to learn. And I also think that we should be accepting a lot more refugees than we do. But all this talk about the EU sort of dictating how many people the UK will receive, it's just a Tory spin. This is going to be a negotiation that Starmer is proposing with the EU to determine how many asylum seekers Britain should take as part of a returns agreement, because we still have this sort of cakeist attitude with any kind of relations with the EU, where the EU, the Conservative government says or expects to get everything it wants, and the EU will have to shoulder
Well, I don't
the
think they
bad
do.
stuff.
Horizon has shown that, because the government's had to pay heavily.
Well,
through that.
it's a positive development, but obviously, if you're going to negotiate a returns agreement with the EU, then clearly you're going to have to offer something in return, and clearly that will involve taking your fair share, which Britain should be doing, because Britain's an important, rich country that has the capacity and resources.
But
to take in
there's the
people.
debate, I think, Jonathan, because I think the idea that Britain is not taking its fair share of asylum seekers into this country is wrong. We've had programs that have done it very successfully. Syria, Ukraine, to name a few. We even had the existing family pass route for people with asylum.
Just taking hardly any people.
Well, look, I think we've done something like 500,000 since 2015.
I think there have been very few family resettlements.
I'm happy to be sense
And the
checked on
Afghanistan
that.
programme,
But
I think
the
only
point
had
I would
44.
make is that decision is being made by the British government. If you enter into an agreement, of course, there's give and take. But that effectively means if the agreement says the EU quota you will accept will be 100,000 or whatever it may be, that is an agreement the country is going to be invited to sign up to. I'm saying that I don't think the politics make that a very attractive option for Kier Starmer to plant his flag on.
Well, the fundamental point is that the government is failing on migration, and the British people can see that, and that we always say that Starmer isn't saying what he'll do, and we just don't know what the Labour programme is, and we have to give him credit, whether you like it or whether you like him or not, that he is at least proposing something.
I do agree.
And
It's right. He's proposed some
he'll get
ideas.
some credit for that, actually, contrary to a lot of Tory commentators saying that he's shot himself in the foot. I think that people will actually say what's happening at the moment isn't working. And let's just be clear that if Rwanda does get passed in the Supreme Court, that might actually be really bad news to the government, because then the government will have to show how this flagship policy is actually unworkable
it's a really
and
interesting
incredibly
point
expensive.
Jonathan's putting over there. So I didn't mean to talk over you, but the complete converse, of course, is Kier Starmer's ruled out Rwanda. And if it does work, and there is a significant drop, he's not going to look so clever either.
It won't work. So that's
Well, we shall see. Just a note before we move on that. What do you make? It feels like the narrative in the last week, at least, feels like after we had the summer of the government having their health week, crime week, etc., it feels like somehow Labour are more in control of the narrative. You've got Kier Starmer going to The Hague to meet with Europol. He's meeting President Macron this week. He was in Canada. It feels like Labour are starting to set the agenda in the political debate. Is that a bad thing for the Conservatives, Nick? Or can they just get on saying, well, you can do all that, but we're running the country at the moment?
It's never a good thing not to have control of the agenda. And one thing governments generally have is control of the agenda. But over the summer, always a risky period, because if there's a vacuum, it's filled by people you don't want to fill it generally. Kier Starmer actually delivered, quite a lot of newsworthy lead items. I think the days of saying that the press are all right-wing rabid Tories are over. He's been getting extraordinary coverage, in fact. Now, the problem he's got is he has, and Jonathan, I agree, the time had come to do it, is he's now making a thing of his policies. We're now actually going to see policies emerging. Peter Mandelson himself has said, your mission statements are not enough. You've got to start putting meat on the bones. That's going to expose him as well. And it'll be interesting to see how well the Labour machine and Kier Starmer hold up to criticism.
But I think the fundamental point is that we are so far down the road now that there's no going back for Conservatives. So I think that he would have to make a spectacular botching of all this for it to have a dent in the polls either way.
Who was saying it's all about the sort of the Ming vase on a slippery floor?
Roy Jenkins.
There we
Yes.
go. We're at that stage now.
I think he's probably given up the Ming vase, actually, because I think they've reconciled themselves. Exactly Jonathan's thinking. They're going to win, so they can afford to put policies out there. Will that be a miscalculation or not? The odds are it won't be a miscalculation, but anything can happen.